Yesterday, Sheikh Hasina, the country's former prime minister, was found guilty of crimes against humanity and handed the death penalty. She was tried in Amsterdam because she had fled to India last year after massive protest brought down her government. Some of her supporters were angry by the verdict and took to the streets, but many others celebrated the ruling. In fact, police in Dhaka had to use tear gas to disperse protesters who had gathered at Sheikh Hasina's family home, hoping to raise it down. Today, the situation remains tense. Whether Sheikh Hasina will be extradited to Bangladesh from India remains unclear. Regardless, the ruling could reshape the country's political future as it heads towards elections in early February next year.
OK, so let's start with a bit of a recap. Remind us what happened last year.
Before last year, Sheikh Hasina had been in power in Bangladesh for 15 years, but was ruling the country increasingly in an authoritarian way, and so she wasn't popular. What triggered unrest and protest across the country last year was when the Supreme Court implemented a 30% quota in government jobs for the children of freedom fighters. So these were children of freedom fighters who had fought in Bangladesh's War of Liberation in 1971. And they were mostly supporters of the Awami League, the party to which Sheikh Hasina belongs. So this decision sparked huge protest across the country, and especially in Dhaka, the capital. But things really escalated when the government, led by Sheikh Hasina, clamped down on these protests. 1,400 protesters were killed by police and armed forces. More than 20,000 people were injured. Many were permanently disabled. And
what's she now been found guilty of?
So she's been found guilty of various crimes against humanity, all of which she has denied. And specifically, this court presented evidence based on phone conversations and video footage to show that Sheikh Hasina was guilty of ordering the deployment of lethal force during these protests last year. She was claimed to have directed the use of drones, helicopters, and military weapons in a sort of a systematic targeting of unarmed civilians. And the verdict also said that unless Sheikh Hasina surrenders and returns to Bangladesh and is arrested within 30 days of this judgment, she cannot appeal the verdict.
And how has that verdict gone down in Bangladesh?
Well, on the whole, it's been received quite positively. Sheikh Hasina wasn't popular at all. And for the interim government, which replaced the Awami League last year, the verdict fulfills a key promise it made, that it would rebuild the country and bring justice against the perpetrators of the assaults that happened during the protests last year. So the interim government has called the ruling and verdict historic, but it's also urged citizens to stay calm and avoid any violence, and said that anyone that attempts to sort of create disorder would face strict punishment. But amongst the other political parties, the reaction has also been very positive. The Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which is the main opposition to the Awami League, welcomed the verdict, and it said it marks the end of all forms of dictatorship in Bangladesh. But the Awami League itself, Sheikh Hasina's party, claimed that the verdict was politically motivated, and it has rejected the rulings and said the trial was not fair, and it has called for a national shutdown to protest against the verdict.
And was it a fair trial?
So interestingly, the trial was conducted by International Crimes Tribunal, which was a court originally set up in 2009 by Sheikh Hasina's own government to try war criminals during the 1971 War of Liberation in Bangladesh. But the tribunal has always been controversial ever since it's been established. Rights groups and legal experts have argued that it lacks due process in previous trials. There haven't been sufficient defense witnesses, and so it has always been a controversial court. Some critics say that those criticisms still hold for this trial as well. The chief prosecutor insists that the tribunal meets international standards and the trial has been fair. But, for example, Amnesty International has released a statement condemning the verdict of the death penalty and has raised concern about how the trial was conducted.
This is such a political moment, Vishnu. What happens next for Bangladesh?
The big uncertainty is what happens to, I think, Sheikh Hasina and her party, the Awami League. The Awami League may be banned, but it still enjoys significant support. A recent survey by Innovation, a local consultancy in Bangladesh, found that among people who are willing to reveal who they vote for, around 20% would still choose the Awami League in upcoming elections. So it is unclear how this support base is going to react to this verdict. So Dhaka was already on edge yesterday, and police are still out in force. And even over the past year, Bangladesh has sort of remained volatile and prone to bursts of violence under the interim government. And then looking further ahead, there's the big question is also what happens in the election, which is due to take place in early February. The favorites right now, according to polling data, is the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. But as I said earlier, Awami League still enjoys some support, but they're banned and they cannot contest these elections. And then the other sort of longer term question for Bangladesh's future and the health of its democracy is what happens to the July Charter, which is a sort of a reform blueprint produced by this interim government, in which they've outlined several reforms to strengthen Bangladesh's democracy, like by giving the judiciary more independence, imposing a limit on the Prime Minister's terms, increasing women's representation. And so now that charter is also going to be put up to vote during this election in early February 2026. And it remains to be seen whether the charter will be accepted by the people. But that's also a really important question on whether these reforms will take place that will really strengthen Bangladesh's democracy.
And as you said, Sheikh Hasina is in India. She's not in Bangladesh. So presumably this is a pretty big test of India-Bangladesh relations.
I mean, relations haven't been great. So Bangladesh, after the verdict, requested India to extradite Sheikh Hasina. And there is a treaty between the two countries, but it's unclear whether India will accede to Bangladesh's request. So far, the India's Foreign Ministry has said it has noted the verdict, but it has reiterated the support for peace, democracy and stability in Bangladesh, but has not yet committed to any extradition. And I think the big question is what happens after the election, when the next government comes in, and whether it pushes hard for Sheikh Hasina's extradition. And that would really increase pressure on India if a democratically elected government in Bangladesh is asking for Sheikh Hasina's extradition. And that would really be sort of add pressure and strain to the relationship with Bangladesh.
Vishnu, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thanks for having me, Rosie.